Hello, beautiful starlets. So I'm going to make this video for Patreon, but I think I'm going to put it on public straight away, which is something I don't usually do. I usually do an early access on Patreon, and the videos go up much later on YouTube. But I feel that this one is important, and I really wanted to talk to you about it today. And I've had a few sort of pokes from the universe to just go ahead and make this. And we're going to be talking about sovereignty under the Morrigan, but toxic traps, as well as personal responsibility, and then a little bit of sort of victim blaming and playing victim, as well as concepts, and what I feel about all of these things, as well as some of my experiences, some of my shadow work. It kind of is shadow work under the Morrigan, to be honest, but it's very difficult to sort of sum up this because it's going to be a bit of a larger topic, talking about some of the more difficult things. So I have just released a blog post through the Patheos blog Agora, and you can read it there, and I will be referencing it as part of this video. So I released that blog post because I had been contemplating about what it meant, what sovereignty really truly meant, about mastery of the self under the Morrigan, and how we define it and redefine it, and it keeps shape-shifting very much like her energies, and what it meant to me. And then I was pulling the cards for Patreon this week, and I was looking at those energies, about Mullane's receptivity to light and speaking, and using the creative spark, and what felt appropriate and necessary in that given point. And this is what felt necessary. So to start with, I'm going to be referring to the blog post, and then we're going to talk about some personal thoughts around toxic traps, what it means, energies around selfishness, and what that means, that came up under this week's reading. So my journey with the Morrigan is a constant cycle of defining and redefining what personal sovereignty means. It is the unpicking of arrogance and privilege, neither of which are nourishing to the soul or helpful to the path. Arrogance and privilege are vehicles of oppression, weapons of weakness that are easy to hide behind when one feels wounded or attacked. It is easy to answer with disdain, to seek out haughtiness and superiority when angered, to guard our broken heart, but what does it serve? Who does it serve? Certainly not ourselves, for we seek to overpower when we feel threatened, which sounds like a futile maneuver. We cannot undo a wound by pretending it does not exist. These are definitely things that I have noticed about myself. I get very, very haughty when I feel really wounded, and it's something that I have noted about my own defense mechanisms, so that I have to be really careful about them. It's come from my nana. My nana was like that too, that she would sort of draw all her energy up into an ice queen kind of veneer, when people were coming for her. Now, she lived in a different time, so I'm sure as a woman who she did very well at work, considering she had to have that, because she was under constant sort of barrage of superiority complexes from different places in her life. But that is something that I have learned, and I know that it is also a response to trauma, and to sort of draw in one's energy and to put up a wall and refuse to have a conversation about it. So this is actually a defense mechanism. So this actually feeds into this kind of demanded silence thing that happens when people are trying to silence you, and we're going to reference that from the blog post in a second. So that can be a really dangerous thing, that to sort of retreat into the self, get very walled off, very cold, and refuse to have a dialogue, refuse to have a discussion, is definitely a self-defense mechanism of my own. And so that can be really dangerous when it's coupled with this idea of you have to be silent. I'm just going to read a little bit more from the blog post. Sovereignty can be tearing off, feeling under attack, and questioning which battles you actually want to show up to. What is worth your time? What is worth your energy? What is worth your peace of mind? When is it somebody else's list? I have had men calling me stupid, men in particular, calling me stupid and threatening me with rape and murder because I chose to align myself and speak out against racism recently. I have people claiming that I was inviting enemies or creating them by choosing to speak out on the subject. They crave my silence, my obedience. They shall never have it. I have learned to trust that when I turn my back to hatred, there is a shield there. The Morrigan built me from stardust and roots, resilient, proud, hopeful. I must check myself time and again, but it is my honor to do so. I must not fall into the trap of seeking to protect my wounds. I must honor them, wash them clean, and allow them to heal. And I think washing them clean is really important when we are talking about personal sovereignty, toxic traps, patterns of behavior, and holding ourselves to account. So when I'm talking about toxic traps, this is slightly different to what other people are trying to force onto you, labels that people are trying to force onto you, discussions of who you are without any consideration for who you are, gossip, viciousness, all that stuff is something that we all come into contact with, sadly, time and again. For those of us who work with dark goddess energies, I feel like choosing to take a stand against things, choosing to put your voice to things that you think are righteous or are needed or necessary, things that really truly matter to you, you will have people appear that want to tear that down for reasons of their own because it pokes their shadow. I have said time and again, I find that I am a shadow poker, and I end up quite subconsciously or unconsciously or not on purpose most of the time, from what I talk about, poking people's shadows. They feel under personal attack because of something that I have talked around, or my experiences, or my feelings or thoughts. Sometimes it's just the tone and sound of my voice is enough, and it's just a part of who I am that I cannot and will not change. So there's that pride. Because to undo who we are at core for other people's comfort is kind of against the idea of what it means to me to be like priestess or whatever applicable label for voice in the spiritual community. To undo that is to try and undo parts of myself, like to try and fit in someone else's mold, to make myself smaller for someone else's comfort. And there is a lot of aggression when you refuse to do that. When you shine, when you step forward, when you keep speaking, when you keep doing the work, there is a lot of hostility that unfortunately comes to bear, and it is our job to look at which situations are worth our time and energy, and which we are going to show up for. And half the time we've got to learn not to do that, because it is super easy to show up to every argument, every person who wants to threaten you, speak ill of you, gossip about you, be nasty to you. We all go through these situations, and being online, it's an open doorway for people who want to hide behind a screen, and it's really easy to do that. So that is one part of the sovereignty that I wanted to talk about, and some of the energies that are around. But I also want to talk about ego. Is this not okay? Toxic traps. And I don't want to call them ego traps like some people do, because I think that vilifies the ego. And I don't want to call them sort of materialistic traps or something, because that undermines the importance of living in a material, mundane, manifested existence. And I think there's too much of that in the spiritual community. It kind of becomes like a spiritual bypass, for that. So what I will call them is kind of toxic traps. And like looking at, excuse me, I have an eye itch. Oh, so professional. Looking at where our personal responsibility is versus where it is not in toxic traps of behavior. Now, I want to say that something I've been learning a lot about and about myself is that we always have a choice, and what we choose to do with that choice is another building block of who we are becoming and who we are building ourselves and creating ourselves into. And we can change at any given point. We have to do the work. We can't just change it like, oh, it's fine, and now I'm different now, and that it's not true. It just doesn't happen. Human beings are creatures of habit. So we have to keep checking ourselves time and time again. And apparently, as I learned recently, the sort of behaviors we learn when we are growing up can take 7 years to relearn neurologically. So if we have sort of learned defense mechanisms because we've been in an abusive situation, or we can find ourselves reliving that, not only from a spiritual perspective, but like from a very almost physical one. Like we end up trying to sort of repattern our past by almost falling into the same trap again. And so toxic traps is definitely something that I know a lot about. And I went to a socially distanced, very small gathering just the other day, as they've started allowing certain ones in certain gardens. And I was so thankful that I could release it there. And I obviously, I'm not going to share the stories of other people that are held in sacred space, because that's against my personal code of ethics. That, you know, anything that you are told in confidence and trust, the sharing of that is against my personal code of ethics. I won't do it. And it, you know, that has been tested time and again, and I have learned growing as a person that there are certain things that you share with people you trust, and then outside of that, not so much. But I'm not going to share the stories of other women, but it was a beautiful space where we have shares, and the deep, painful things can be shared and heard without comment, without question, without trying to fix a person. And that, to me, has been something. The Red Ted circles were going on for quite some time before lockdown, and that was something that I found deeply helpful, to be able to own the pain that I had been carrying, and that was a heavy burden. So I had realized that I got myself into toxic cycles that were abusive, and I felt such heavy shame and embarrassment that I had gotten myself into situations again that were painful and the opposite of enlightening. And the fallout from having done that was even, you know, I felt the shame weighing heavy upon my shoulders. Now, some of the work that I'm doing about having acknowledged that, so I have acknowledged it publicly already, but it's private. Like, there's counseling and things that people don't need to know about. It's nobody else's fucking business. And that is true of all spiritual journeys. There are some things which are just none of anybody else's business as to whether I choose to speak to counselors and things like that. So it's none of anyone else's business, really. The work is being done, though, for, you know, personal accountability on the video, I guess. But I felt such heaviness, I felt such pain, I felt such shame about it, and I hurt the people that I live with as a result. And we have all had very long conversations about it, and I asked for their forgiveness, and they forgave me. And we're doing the work. They owned the things on their side too. It's not just like a one-sided thing. So that's something else to remember, that in the traps that we fall into, there are going to be things that you are accountable for, and there are some things that you are semi-accountable for, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then there are things that are just nothing to do with you. They're not your fault. And as an individual, I have always gone round and round and round in my head looking for the thing that I did wrong, the place that I was accountable. And when I was a kid, this was unfortunately a mechanism of control by abusers, because I was blaming myself as a child. I was trying to handle it myself as a child, because if I'd have gone to my mother, it would have greenlit far worse things to happen to me. And I know that to be true, sadly, because when she did find out, she doesn't believe me, or didn't at the time, or deep down knows, but rejects. She'll believe my sister than on me. There you go. So that would have greenlit far worse. So I was right, unfortunately. And in that situation, a child is not to blame. A woman is not to blame for being attacked and raped, or a man who's been raped. Anybody who's been raped, they're not to blame for that. But a lot of us turn inward and are like, well, I shouldn't have done this, I shouldn't have done that, maybe I shouldn't have been drinking, maybe I shouldn't have worn this. And that's all bullshit. That's bullshit. That's just blaming an individual who's been harmed. And that, as I shared a post recently about victim blaming, and I think it's important to bring that up as a part of this, is just, it's almost re-abusing them all over again, because they've already been through that mental anguish, they've already been through that emotional and spiritual anguish, and to then sort of like attach that to them and seek to attach that to them is just cruel. It's cruelty, and is unnecessary and unkind. So when we're looking at the toxic cycles, I look at where I'm accountable. Do I go in thinking, I'm going to get myself in a toxic cycle now, that's going to be great for me, and then, you know, I'll be hurt and I can have a pity party out of it? No, of course I fucking don't. Ridiculousness. I fall in love, whether it be platonic or romantic. I go in full of hope and grand ideas, right? I've even been called naive by one of my exes, which is interesting, to your detriment. And that's sadly kind of true, because I go in and I'm very hopeful, I'm very proud. And the problem that I have when I go into these situations is that I go in with, oh, we can fix this, we can sort it, that doesn't matter. I'm like ignoring red flags that, you know, most people would not, because I know that they've been hurt and broken, or hurt in a similar way to me in their childhood, things like that, you know. And I see a place to relate, which isn't really a place to relate, right? There's a disconnect. There's a wanting to help, there's a wanting to heal, there's a wanting to do all these good things. I have all these great good intentions. Now, am I 100% good person all the way through it? Probably not. Like, all human beings make mistakes, we all screw up, we all have arguments, we all mess up from time to time. I think it's just part of being human, and anyone pretending that they don't is lying. So I'm not going to sit here and lie to you in a video where I think it's really important to be honest. And reclaiming that kind of sovereignty comes from that too, from that honesty. That's really important, especially when looking under the Morrigan who sees all, or any deity really, who sees all, who knows all. Then they know the truth. Do I ignore things or try and make things right when I shouldn't? Yes, I have, and that's something I'm having to work on and look at. Do I, and in that situation, I noticed in that toxic trap, I became very angry all the time, because I was being silenced, because I couldn't speak out, because I was afraid to speak out, because I got myself into that situation again in my head, right? And there's different levels of that depending on people's opinions. Some people are like, oh, well, certain individuals prey on people that they know have been abused, and they can manipulate them. Like, that's a thing that does happen. But I'm also a person who's like, with very few exceptions, there are some exceptions, but I don't tend to see people as like good or bad people. I tend to see people as, you know, wounded, and some things are problematic, but they're healing, and then you see a glimmer of hope in them, and you think, oh, change is coming, and then it's not. And then giving up on people for me is really hard. Really, really, oh, let's see, wanted to cry. Really, really hard, and it takes a lot. But you know, once I'm there, I'm there. And so for me, learning gets me into those toxic traps, even if it comes from a place of wanting to be loved, even if it comes from a place of wanting to help, is looking for the warning signs, and learning to balance how much I give out into the world and to individuals, and where I slip up and where I fall into shadow traps. I realized recently that just through the recent toxic trap, that the shadow of comparison was a habit that I needed to just absolutely kick, because it and people trying to force it upon me is self-destructive. I will never be as good as blah. It's just by its very nature harmful. Or this belongs to me, not them, is harmful, deeply wounded, harmful. And again, that kind of wanted to protect what is mine, because I have shadows of everything always been taken away from me, which is sadly built into the experiences I've had over the years. It's a very natural reaction in a lot of ways, because it's very like, well, if I keep it here, then no one can. And sometimes we have to just breathe and let go. And honestly, that has been a massive lesson under the pandemic for me. Lessons of breath under the pandemic, right? Breathe and let go. And if it depends about looking at where things are worth fighting for and stuff, because I knew that I would get some hate for standing up for other people, and who I would, and I had to choose to do that anyway. But in some other things, you didn't invite that, and the idea that you invite that in just by being yourself is really toxic out there, like, and it can really batter people down, especially people who've been hurt or harmed. And here we're going to talk a little bit about victim blaming, victim shaming. There have been a number of times in my life when I've talked out about certain issues, and a number of times when people have been like, you're playing the victim for sympathy, you're playing the victim for this reason and that reason. And honestly, it used to really get me angry. It doesn't now. I feel like if you're coming to someone with that, there's something very deeply wrong there, and you need to do a lot of healing. Badly, there's something you are holding on to, which is poisoning yourself, because the reason for me speaking out is absolutely none of anybody else's damn business. But the reason that I did this, and I said this in Red Tent, and I'll try not to cry again, because I bawled my eyes out in Red Tent when I said it. The reason that I speak out about abuse and stand up for other people being abused in different ways, because I believe that human beings should be treated with decency and respect, is because I've been through it. I go through the trauma cycles of resolving my trauma, and nobody in the world gets to tell me why I'm doing that. They don't get to tell me that I'm selfish, stupid, and wanting to be a victim, a professional victim, in order to get attention. Do you realize the ugliness inherent in that belief, in that statement, in that attack? I'm going to repeat this line, because I think from this blog post, which relates to this, they crave my silence, my obedience. They shall never have it. I've had men, sadly, that have come through, and then they just hate women. You can see it from all over, they're posting here, there, and everywhere, and it's always, hating women. That's whatever's wrong with them. And they don't want people talking about abuse. I talk about abuse because I want other people out there to know they're not alone. And people have come to me and said that they felt less alone knowing it. And do I talk about it every minute of every day? No. Do I blame it for everything? Or like some of the abusive stuff that's happened is sort of like echoes of that in the future. I think there is a root there. There is learned self-defense mechanisms there. There is problematic stuff within me because of it. But I recognize it, I acknowledge it, I receive that information, and I seek to work through it, usually privately, because that is a massively private thing. And there's some things that very few, if anybody, really knows. And that is as it should be. Like, some things are not for other people's consumption on any level. Not privately, friends-wise, not even, you know, my sister knows 99% of everything, but like even some things are private and between you and a counselor or whatever. No shame in that. And the idea that people want to bring the shame into what you are doing, saying, or speaking, I'm not okay with it. I'm not okay with that. I think there is an importance in realizing that we do get into these toxic traps, and they cage us, they harm us, and we have to look at where we're responsible for not doing that in the future. Even though we know some of these things are learned behaviors or like places that aren't healed. And we're not blaming ourselves, but we are holding ourselves responsible for who we are as individuals and who we are wanting and choosing to become. And I know that lesson really deeply, that every point is a choice. And I choose to be better. Wanting to be loved is not a bad thing, it's a human thing. We all do. Knowing where the roots for where that becomes behavior or feeds into behaviors which lead us to not be our best selves is key. Shining a light on that, doing the work. If anyone's wants some more ideas, like I recommend a counselling anyway. There's no shame in that. If you need medication as well, there's no shame in that. I've got a journal book recently, which I'm working through some ideas, different ideas from how I've usually worked through, looking at improving who you want to be going forward, putting the energy into something to create. So if you find yourself lingering around a destructive cycle, you sort of do the shadow work around it, you unpick it, and then you put that energy somewhere else. Like, okay, I could spend time in this cycle doing negative things, looking at negative things, dragging myself down into a space of unworthiness, or I can put that energy somewhere else. And that's what I choose to do and will continue to choose to do, because that is sovereignty to me. The creation, the moving forward, the building of something rather than trying to be destructive. Sometimes things fall down, some things fall away. Just the nature of things, and it's sad. My heart has been heavy and sad for a while. Not even angry, just sad. And I know who I choose to be. And that's not who, well, it's not who toxic exes say that I am for their own blaming reasons. Definitely not. And I have to let go of the shame of getting myself into those situations, and allowing myself to be silent in them as much as I was. Like, not completely silent, because I never am, but standing up, keep going, keep creating, keep building, being better, learn to do better in the future. I can rake myself over and over and over and over again for what I've done, and honestly that is the Virgo way. So I've kind of already done some of that, but I think it is more important to take that, go speak to a professional, take that, hold yourself to account, and then move on and learn from it. Because if we don't learn, we don't change, we don't grow, we don't become better people, and that is more important to me than anything else. So yeah, so that's about it, guys. That is my talk to you that I felt really needed to be done. Divinely inspired, toxic traps, stuff into Morrigan. I hope you are well, and as I have been saying recently, I see and honor your journey, I honor your courage. Be well. Many blessings.